Love, peace, and power, everybody. Welcome to the Mystery Arcade Occult Multiversity. My name is Kilel Kiano, aka Konami Codes. Thank you for joining me, whether you're listening from or watching from YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Greatly appreciate you checking in. We have one of my favorite people in the world, the Professor Michael Bell, author of The Metaphysics of Star Trek and the Occult Meaning of Masonry. Welcome back, brother. How are you? How you feeling?
Man, I'm feeling fantastic, and again, the feeling is mutual. I love our opportunities to build because you seem to bring out the best in me, and it's always a pleasure. But I'm feeling great.
I'm happy to hear, big bro. I'm happy to hear. That is definitely ditto right back at you. I have been immersed in this book since I got it. It's been a great source of inspiration in a myriad of ways, and I really think I don't want to speak for you, but I really feel like that was the intention. Because you can see it in the detail. You can feel it, especially for those of us who have a great appreciation or perhaps a deeper or a greater awareness of Star Trek, some of the history. Um, I don't. I wanna jump off where we kind of touched down. Um, there's for those who are familiar with the series, there are narratives in Star Trek that are overarching that actually reach across the different series. One of those would be Q, right? Q, we see. I think we meet him for the very first time in the first episode, the pilot episode of the Next Generation.
Hmm.
Q, for all intents and purposes, just looking at the appearance of things, he looks like he's almost in love with Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Um, my theory behind that, I would love to get your insight. My theory on that is when I realized how much the Enterprise represented the circumpunk. The circumpunk, that's the pineal gland or the dot within the dot within the circle. Um, the only symbol Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen actually respected. Right, we can understand why.
Hmm.
The Enterprise did something new in the Next Generation that the previous iteration didn't do, and it could separate its bridge from the body. There has to be a correlation between that and meditation, or what I would say astral projection.
Hmm.
It was typically done very much with a purpose. Sometimes it was done in dire circumstance. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I'm glad you see. And so, what I tried to point out, I'm gonna go backtrack a little bit and then get to the question at hand. What I tried to show in the book was the evolution, not just of consciousness, but the vehicles reflected that as well. Even though the series didn't drop in chronological order, it started with Captain Kirk's Star Trek, then it went to Picard's, and eventually we got Star Trek Enterprise, which showed the beginning. And so I pointed out in the book how in the very first Star Trek vessel, the warp core was horizontal, right? So a lot of people, you may not have thought nothing of it, but that showed a progression because man was beginning to take that first step into outer space, which I point out also is just exploring the mind. So by that warp core, which is like the spinal column, with the warp core energy, that's the Kundalini energy. Well, it was horizontal. We know that horizontal is synonymous with dead, so that's why in all of the other iterations of Star Trek, that warp core was vertical. It was up. It was up and down. And so when we got to Next Generation and that saucer section could detach, just what you said, it was showing that we could become you could become more than just your body. You know what I'm saying? And so, to be truthful with you, if you rewatch that very first episode of Next Generation, I got something for you that's gonna blow your mind away. When they encounter Q and they start to have these problems within the vessel, not Kirk, Picard gets an update from the metaphysical department. You know what I'm saying? It's a little snippet, but they let you know exactly what's going on right there. They had a metaphysical department. They had a metaphysics department. And so I think that really set the tone because, again, everything we're watching on these series it's happening in the astral or the technical term would be the ether, the etherics, but the etheric realm, but it's all happening right there. And so just to point out that connection to show that the separation of the saucer and the ability to go places, to travel and transport, all of that ties into meditation and the ability to access higher realms. And I'll say something else also that I didn't put in the book. A lot of things didn't go in the book because I wanted it to be brief for a reason. I didn't want, I have a tendency, anybody that has my first book will know 360 something pages, but I wanted it to be brief. But another thing about Star Trek that applies is the fact that the prime directive, general directive number 1, that every captain, every Starfleet officer is not to interfere with non-warp capable species, right? And so on the surface, it just sounds like, the colonizers are not going to share any advanced technology, but that's not really it. What that prime directive really is about is saying something that we do that's discussed a lot in the conscious community. Somebody's always trying to wake somebody else up, but there's consequences to attempting to wake somebody up who it's not their time. You have to reach a certain stage within yourself before you can begin to adapt and adopt higher principles of consciousness. And that's what the prime directive is. You're not to go in and throw an alarm clock in the graveyard and wake up the dead. People have to, even in the Bible, Jesus said, man, let the dead bury the dead. Right. And so a lot of it's almost spooky how much correlates and corresponds between this series that most people take on the surface level to the deeper meanings, because that prime directive is in place. And in different episodes, like in Voyager and other ones, you find out the dangers of actually giving someone technology or means that they're not ready to access and utilize,
Yeah, that's most definitely because you can see Starfleet essentially being. There's a video game from a few years ago. It wasn't called the Blob, but it was essentially you were a big blob that just rolled over everything and assimilated it.
Oh, yes,
That's
yes. I'm up on that game. Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about?
Uh-huh.
Like that's Starfleet. You know what I'm saying? Because I love in your book how you say how conflict is so much better a universal term than war. When you hear war, we're literally programmed to respond only one way. It's war. Somebody got to die. But conflict is natural. Conflict is one of the most natural things, right next to change.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that we'll come into conflict. When we first meet or when we first cross paths, but we can assimilate. We have things that we can offer you. And you can join us. You see this with the Romulans, the Vulcans, the Klingons, the Bajorans. An aspect of the next generation that I feel, and it took me a minute because I was so in love with the characters. And yeah, I think you might be right, Moonfest. I think it might have been the glob. I think it might have been the glob. Um, Lieutenant Commander Data.
Mm-hmm.
He was a synthezoid, right? If I'm using the term correctly. Um, and essentially, all he ever wanted to do was feel. You get to see him go through his evolution. He had Geordi, his space age best friend, who
Yeah.
I found it particularly because he couldn't necessarily see the way other people could. That was a big point of contention when we first saw Jordy, because he could actually see better than
Mm-hmm.
most. So that dynamic of the friendship was always important to me. But when we go to Deep Space Nine, we get that expanded, I think, in a way in terms of Jadzia Dax.
Oh.
Um, and that takes a while because essentially we're talking about, you could argue, and this is an alien organ, but you could argue is reminiscent to me of the warp factor, the warp core,
Mm-hmm.
because it's now interchangeable. She was able to not only live her own life, but she was able to go back into her own Akashic records, essentially, which I think is the same thing Data was trying to do, but Data was just completely cut off from what he knew to be his emotion, because he was on the outside of it. He was experiencing it and not necessarily knowing what it was. Can you speak to that dynamic?
Okay, now you pointed out. Now I actually take that dynamic a little differently, but I'm glad for the different angle of light you just dropped. So for me, what I notice is that every episode of every new iteration of Star Trek, there is someone that we get to explore humanity through their eyes. So for me, that was Data. It was Mr. Spock in the original Star Trek. There's always somebody that you get to get a fresh view of humanity, because truth be told, we're all aliens. You know, something I say, and believe it or not, I've had people get angry by this. We've never seen anything, we've never tasted anything, we've never smelt anything, any of our senses. Because if you think about it, your your sight is your eyes take in this visual element, but your brain is encased in darkness. The eyes relay electrochemical signals to the brain. The brain interprets those signals, sifts through memories, and tells you that's a chair, that's a fence, that's a brick, XYZ. Smells. Your brain has a catalog of smells. Those smells are converted into electrochemical signals. And then that goes in, and the brain tells you, oh, that's pizza, that's bread, that's soda. So when I look at like Data, he is our attempt to view humanity from that outside point, right? Now, when it came to Jadzia, how I view, now for me on Deep Space Nine, Odo played the same role as Data. Jadzia, and the fact that she had a trill inside of her and she had lived, I believe, seven different lifetimes. She had, like you hit it head on, spot on. She had access to her Akashic. Matter of fact, they even had a series of episodes where there was one of her lifetimes that she had to integrate. She hadn't fully integrated those memories, and she went through a whole thing where she had to accept a past life of hers that was contrary to who she was in the present moment, you know. And so, Moon Feather. Now you know what? Some people can taste and smell in their dreams. You'd be surprised. I'm going off topic. I just saw Moon Feather's comment. Uh, my wife is a good example of that. She can taste and smell in her dreams. So again, the five senses, whereas most of us are a combination of like two, some people are a combination of all five when it comes to our senses and how we utilize them outside of the quote unquote physical. We all learn through our five senses, right? So some people are a combination of auditory and tactile. Maybe you got to write and listen. For some people they learn through smell. they associate different smells with, you know, what they were doing at that moment. So yeah, yeah. So oh wait, God Body said, but you shouldn't eat or drink in the dream state. I don't know. Again, it depends on on the kind of person that you are, because for some people, eating a piece of cake might mean that you're about to get you know, you about to have your cake and eat it too in the real life. So uh I've never read anything or came across me personally. I'm not a taste or smell guy when it comes. Well, sometimes smell, but normally those two don't play a factor for me in like stuff like meditation. But to get back to the original the original question that Konami dropped, um, to me, Jadzia represented a person. Now you got to realize too that Star Trek has always been progressive. So on the mundane, Jadzia actually fits in perfectly with today's non-binary, right? Because uh, you know, you go back to the original Star Trek with Kirk. You know, they had the first interracial kiss. They had the one episode where the people had the faces that one half was white and the other half was black. That was their attempt to address racism. So a lot of these things on the surface, they carry mundane social political status, you know. So for me, I looked at in terms of the metaphysical, I looked at Jadzia as being a person who was fully aware of all her incarnations. On the surface, I kind of felt like she was kind of ahead of that character was ahead of the curve, because it was 22 decades before where we are now in terms of people identifying as other than their gender, their birth gender, you know. So, but yeah, I just looked at Jadzia because you have to realize that all these crew and characters, they actually represent everything going on inside of you, you know. So Captain Kirk is just that one aspect of self, you know. And then uh you know, I put in the book how uh each of the officers represent internal organs, you know, within you. This is how you would expand and explore your inner universe. So for me, uh I basically look at Odo as the data. But now what we got in Deep Space Nine that we didn't get in the previous ones is that we had multiple there were multiple different aspects to explore humanity and higher consciousness, because even though the Ferengi were introduced in Next Generation, we really got to see them as something more than just comic relief. In we got to see it more as just comic relief in Deep Space Nine. We actually got introduced to their religious practices and their beliefs, and we came to find out that their pursuit of profit was actually very spiritual. It was grounded and based in rules that they lived by. So I don't know if that answered the question. You can tap back in and get me back on track.
No, most definitely. It's wild because the synchronicity don't stop. Shout out to Moonfella. She just completely dug in my head. Um, One of the reasons I asked that question was to go deeper into Lieutenant Commander Data.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mooney would she would love to know your analogy on Data's evil twin lore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm gonna let you go ahead with that, and then I'll come back to my thought.
Well, you know, if you think about it, Data has had, uh, I think he's had four. It was lore, uh, it was Data, lore, and then I believe there were two more, or at least one more, because in Picard they found, I believe, B4, right? He was actually the one before Data, right? So again, I, for me, I look at the just if you go just to Data and lore, for me that's the tale of two brothers, goes all the way back to Egypt, and so these are just it's just that dual dynamic, that polarity. So you look at one as being the total opposite of the other. So it's kind of like holding two opposing thoughts in your mind at the same time. And so and truth be told, Data and Lore had the same goals. They both actually just wanted to belong. One just went about it the wrong way. Lore's whole thing was conquest, and again, uh, personally, I view it all through the lens that this is all happening internally, and so we kind of all have these same thoughts aggressively to some degree, some more than others, where you kind of want to go hard and be aggressive, and then other times you figure it's better just to listen, learn, and participate as opposed to constantly smashing. So I haven't really. The only thing for me in terms of I haven't dove too deep into the twin aspect as it being anything other than just a polarity within self. I did begin to look at all of the different iterations of data. Like I said, there always seemed to be at a convenient moment another copy, right? Like even when they introduced Lore for the first time, it was just a spare data sitting around. So, you know.
So what's crazy about it for me, right, is because again, when I'm looking at the series as a whole, through these overarching narratives, you notice what's the same and you notice what's missing, right?
Mhm.
So, there's a much bigger emphasis on the holodeck when it comes to the next generation. So, one thing I remember about Data is he was always using the holodeck. Not only was he always using the holodeck, but um, he would play these games. He would run these scenarios where he would be Sherlock Holmes, or he would be some kind of detective. I love that because to detect anything, shout out to my brother Self Detach as he comes in. Um, it's like you have this awareness that something else is there,
Mhm.
right? Like it's just beyond the senses. It's just beyond the range of your perception. And Data always had. I don't want to say issue, but he always had this awareness. There was a moment when Captain Picard became Lakota. Was that
Locutus. Yeah.
Lacutus? Where Data, he felt the charge. Um, I think it was. I think it was part two of that arc. He was giving Riker almost like flack because he felt some kind of way because he saw something in Picard that he had never seen, like this complete lack
Mhm.
of what made him him, which is exactly why the Borg wanted him. So what you say makes a lot of sense in terms of, they both versions of Data wanted the same goal. They just went about it in different ways. The shadow is going to look crazy to the light.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? The light's going to look crazy to the shadow, especially when we start to inject some of these deeper ideas and awarenesses. The idea that the truth that nothing here is real. Those who study the Kabbalah know, we've never smelled a rose, we've never got a kiss from our mom, we've never actually done these things. We've just had inklings, flashes. And that's largely based on our own perception. It shows you how the mind can make something real. So, my theory behind all that long winded shit is you didn't need the holodeck so much in Deep Space Nine because they had already manifested the black hole or the wormhole.
Mhm. Mhm.
What do you think about that?
No, I think like I will go in again in terms of the mundane. When we got the holodeck and next generation, it was new, and so we saw a lot of, like you said, again, if you follow the path, it was along the same lines of finally figuring out exactly how to meditate, finally figuring out exactly how to manifest. So what do you do with it? You play. That's what you do, is you play. Now, as the different series progressed, we began to see that the holodeck evolved where people ran simulations to see, for this new engine, how to tweak it and make it work. And so it became, I think that when we first learn, when we come into this I call it the conscious. I used to have when we come into the conscious community, right? When you start to meditate, things like that, we all have a tendency to be very serious out the gate, right? And when the best thing you can do is play, that's the best thing you can do. So once you get access to the holodeck, you should play. You should do things where you learn to master this ability. And then you begin to learn what to do. And then once you reach that point, like you said, in Deep Space Nine, they had access to the wormhole. They had access to the Pineal. They know exactly what to do. So once you reach that point, now it can be recreational, because if you think about it, in Deep Space Nine, there was a character, Major Kira. She didn't like the holodeck. I got work to do over here. So, but you'll find that everything is cyclical. So when you start off being very serious, nobody can talk you out of being serious. But at some point, you realize, let me stop being so serious and let me play a little bit. I'm gonna always go back and say that is what Panic had did for me, because I was super serious, right? Back in the days when we used to be in those groups, it was cool to drop and this and that. But then again, play, enjoy, have fun, because the same work that we're accomplishing here, you actually could have did it in the ethers. You don't need a body to do it. You need a body. You incarnate into a physical body, because actually you want to exceed the work. You want to kind of speed it up. That's my personal understanding, is that most of us choose to incarnate so that we can kind of speed up the process. The work can be done on the other side, but on the other side, time doesn't exist. But let me get back to the topic, just in terms of the holodecks. So I felt like initially the playful aspect was just getting to know what could be done with it. And so when they progressed to like Deep Space Nine, I use that again as the example like you use. In Deep Space Nine, if you look at it, Benjamin Sisko, he really only used it like to interact with like his son, or I was about to say for memories, but he never did it to go back in the past. For him, it was something that he used to interact with his son, right? And then, to be truthful, his holodeck was every time he went to the wormhole and he interacted with the entities in the wormhole. So that was his. He was the one that actually progressed the whole concept into the more expansive aspect of universal, because whenever he would go in there, when he interacted with the prophets, that was more of the dynamic of actual meditation. And I always want to say this, because if you watch that series, what was so powerful for me about Deep Space Nine is that it directly introduced and dealt with spirituality, and so Cisco really had no need for the holodeck. If you really watch that series, outside of him playing baseball with the crew, he really didn't interact, because he already had access to the pineal. He had access to the wormhole, and he got all his downloads directly. He got them direct from the source. And so for me to see him go from basically being a grieving single dad to a religious figure, and then eventually ascend to godhood, and it all ties in to the topic that we're saying in terms of the holodeck, because the holodeck is a smaller version of what we experience in meditation, but essentially it is just for play. It's still rudimentary, unless you're running some kind of simulation. I'm speaking in terms of the series and in actuality. When you go into meditation, it is okay to play. to learn exactly what you can and cannot do, to realize the different places you can go, and to give yourself assignments and homework that you enjoy. But at some point, you should begin to take homework with you, which is something that I do. You have a problem, you have a problem in real life, and so you should sleep on it. I'm gonna switch reels briefly. I want to speak on something. What drew me? Oh, peace to the God Hanif. Peace, bro. What drew me to Star Trek, and the reason why in my book I have the different aspects of leadership, was that we look at different leaders in Star Trek. We look at all these different leaders, and each of them have a different style. Picard, he kind of led. He didn't lead by committee, but he let everybody give him their opinion, and he made his own opinion. Kirk led from the front. Let me think who more or less led from the back. Captain Archer, you could say he led from the back. He wasn't that gung ho. He sent his people in. You tell me what's happening. So the thing about leadership, and the reason why I put it in there, is because we find ourselves in situations where I used to always look at the captains and say they always had an answer, right? And we know that by it being a 1 hour series, if they didn't have it right away, they had it before the hour was up, right? So we find ourselves in life, we find ourselves looking for answers and solutions. And we tend to feel like we have to have those answers and solutions right away. Now, the beauty of meditation and realizing that time as a concept, it's not really linear like we think it is, right? We actually have all the time in the world. I know we only have 24 hours in a day, but time is actually on our side. So when I say that you should take homework into the astral, into meditation, into the dream, this is where different leadership styles come in. And this is why you should take these decisions that you face in life, you take them into the dream. You take them into meditation. And so all of the play that you did in meditation, that should have taught you how to take a concept from here and work on it there. And so I do it all the time. You take you hear people all the time say, you ask them a question, they say, let me sleep on it. And then when they wake up in the morning, they know exactly what to do. Well, to me, that is an aspect of meditation, hollow suites, all of that tied up into one. Yes, it is okay to play, but play should teach you what you can do, what you're capable of doing, and then give you an idea of what you want to do. But you should always take these things in there with you to work on. So I had it in here in the book. I have the different mundane aspects of leadership, but I'm saying that in real life, when we're faced with different problems, I wanted to make out each captain as a different archetype, like the Jungian archetypes. And I used also example of the major arcana and tarot archetypes. So that way, some of us grasp other concepts easier, but it's the correspondence between the two. So maybe you can look at the fool or the magician in the tarot and immediately see its correspondence to you. But you can look at Q and realize that Q is more of a trickster. He's more of a certain archetype that can correspond to this, and you can easier work with one of these Star Trek archetypes. And so what I wanted to show was that our style of leadership doesn't have to be rigid. And when I say leadership, I'm talking about the leadership of self, right? Now, others will gravitate to you. You will shine bright. That was another part of Star Trek when Khalil mentioned that Star Trek assimilated everything. And it's strange that you said that. I want to get back to it because the Borg were the external manifestation of that assimilation. They just did it by force. But I lost my thought just that fast. I just wanted to show how you don't have to be rigid in your style of leadership, right? And so we have all of these different archetypes. We have the mother, we have the warrior, we have the father, we have the fool, we have the wise old man. We have all these different archetypes, right? What each of these captains represented was a means to access those. So you might find yourself in a situation where you're dealing with something in real life, not just in terms of metaphysical concepts, but something very tangible. I wanted to provide these different archetypes. And I also wanted to make the book similar in a way that you can easily transition and you can replace Star Trek with any series, any show, any movie. I wanted to be more of a template so that you can take something else you might like. I got like me and Khalil, we were talking offline maybe a week ago about Babylon 5. Right, I'm into sci-fi, but it doesn't have to be sci-fi. You can actually apply this same concept to any soap opera, anything you like. It can be episodic or it could be a movie, but you take these concepts and you find the correspondences. And so when you see a way that you can apply it in your life, then that's what you gravitate to. Star Trek actually just gave us all these different iterations where you have you have more cards in your deck to deal with. So a certain situation you might handle like Kirk. Another situation you might handle like Picard, but not Picard from TNG, but the old school Picard. And in the new Star Trek Picard, the older, more seasoned Picard, you have these different options and aspects to tap into, because that's what it really comes down to. And the one thing I really want to stress is that I don't want anybody listening right now to think that just because you're on this metaphysical, spiritual, or occult journey, that at any time you have to suffer or do bad. We were the beauty of the Star Trek universe is money doesn't exist, right? In the Star Trek universe, money came down to energy. So once they had access to warp energy and replicators, money was no longer an option. And so they strove to show that with money off the table, with not having to worry about survival and money, that mankind, humanity, you will thrive. You'll go from survival mode to thriving, And so I don't know how I ended up there. I got on the straight. I went on a tangent, but that's just to bring it back to the holodecks, meditation, and these archetypes. I really believe that there's a means to tie them all in and then apply it in actuality. And that was the one thing when I wrote this book. I didn't tell anybody that I put that aspect into the book, and I was waiting for the feedback. And so what I will do real quick, Khalil, I want to share something. As brief as this book is, it's actually a compiling of two separate books, because originally I'd written a book before my daughters were born. So this is 2008. I written a book called Star Trek on Leadership in Life. And it was just about the different leadership styles and things like that. And you figure 2008, there were at least two more Star Treks, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard. A lot of the other series stuff hadn't came out yet. But when I wrote that book, it just felt incomplete to me. So I never did anything with it. And then shout out to Issa Abernathy, the mobile mystic, on Instagram. Good friend of mine. We build constantly. He was the one that motivated me to write the metaphysics of Star Trek, because even though I had this book on leadership in life and how to apply these different styles in your life, I was constantly talking about the metaphysical aspects and the spiritual meanings and the chakra correlations and correspondences. So Issa gave me the idea to actually combine the two. And so when I look at the book, I know most people know me as the Professor Mike Bell. I shoot funnies on Facebook, but I drop knowledge and I share insights and things like that. But at the core, I was waiting for the feedback, and I wanted to show that this is a melding of the two concepts. This is how what I wanted to do was show how you could bring heaven down to earth, or vice versa, because that's the work we're actually doing. Is to transcend the physical and to manifest some of that here while we're in the physical. But go ahead, Khalil. If there's some, but when you get back to it, I want to talk about the Borg, because if you notice in the book, the Borg wasn't in the book.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. I'm noticing more and more. I'm about to I know you know your numerology. You know what I'm saying? So like I've got some things I noticed when I went back through. Um, so to show you how on point you are, right? Everything you said about the captains you just described through numerology, right?
Oh,
When you look at Captain Jean-Luc Picard's birthday, his birthday is July 13, 2305,
mm,
which makes him a three life path, right? So he's naturally very creative. It don't matter what the situation is you put him in. Like, I remember because, in my world, Captain Jean-Luc Picard was older. So when he displayed emotion, it was a real thing. I kind of sidelined him next to my grandfather, right? Like you didn't see no emotional unless shit was real. However, it was really funny, or it was really fucked up, or it was really serious, or whatever it was. It wasn't no in between. When you saw Captain Jean-Luc Picard play, he played. You know what I'm saying? Like very often, I remember he would be in these different outfits, running these different narratives and just smiling, having a good time. And Riker will be looking at him like, "What the fuck are you doing?" You know what I'm saying? Like you're the captain of the Enterprise. You know what I'm saying? And over time, he learned like the captain needs to play. Well, he's a three life path. That's that childlike energy, right? So they didn't choose that date by happenstance. They chose it on purpose.
mm-hmm.
When you look at Captain Benjamin Sisko, not only do we get the fact that he's a one life path, born in Louisiana of all places,
Of all
in
places.
2332, which makes him a one life path, a natural born leader.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to see that step up, that graduation from Captain Jean-Luc Picard. And I don't want to get too crazy or get too deep, but there's another narrative that we have to look at Gene Roddenberry for understanding, because he shows you how the intention of so-called white people served its purpose, because that allowed Benjamin to step up. Avery Brooks is a seven life path in real life, right? That's the genius, that's the artist, that's
Mm.
the spiritual loner. So when you look into the narrative of Benjamin Sisko, it completely lines up, aside from the fact that now he's a leader. So they enabled Avery to actually just be who he was through the beard or through the narrative of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
That narrative continues. This is how I know I'm not crazy, because when we get to Star Trek Voyager, now you have the divine feminine, you have a woman
Mm-hmm.
literally going where no one has gone before, which is actually back home, because they've gone too far out. So when you look at, and I'm not pushing numerology to be the end all be all. It's a wonderful way to see, and it's very simple for me. But the characters live it out. So whether you understand it or not, you can see it being enacted.
No, that's without a doubt. I again, I dropped it in the book, and what I was saying was that um anybody that's familiar with the Star Trek series, you always know that letters and numbers play a big part. I mean, a huge part. There's always a scene where, let's say, it's a battle, and he'll say, "Bring us around to, you know, coordinates 127 Mark 032." So the numbers, we know that numbers play a big part. Matter of fact, most of the planets and star systems they visit are just I believe they're Latin or Greek, they're Greek numbers or letters. And we know that back then used well back then we knew that letters and numbers were interchangeable. So Omicron Theta is actually a series of letters and numbers, you know. And so I'm glad that you touched on, because we kind of ping pong between TNG and Deep Space Nine, but you were right in the fact that when it got to Star Trek Voyager, uh, that was an outright acknowledgement of the divine feminine. You know, that was huge, because you figure up until this time we had got all these. We actually, at that time we had only had, what was it? Uh, we had 4 iterations of the divine masculine. So we finally got this feminine. Now, what I didn't like is that they her character as a divine feminine, they never paired her up with the masculine. They left her as the divine feminine, as being singular, which is something that I think they got wrong in that. You know, they played her. You could tell they played around with ideas to pair that energy up, but they never did. You know, and so if you think about it, the one thing that every captain has had, except for the only 2 that I can think of offhand that didn't have some kind of romantic interest, no, only the one. It was just her. Every other male every other male character had some kind of interaction with the feminine, but when they had her character, she had to be this strong woman that was alone, and that wasn't really cool. But overall they got it right. But I just say, like you said, I definitely believe that Gene Roddenberry was tapped into something. He actually had his hands in everything up until these very much newer series. And if it wasn't him who had his hand in it, it was his wife. I can't recall right now what year he passed away, but he had a hand in everything up until, I want to say, maybe like 2015 or something. So he was very much involved. He was tapped into something, because he actually brought forth, another thing that I point out in the book was that a lot of technology was invented from that show. The Bluetooth that most of us have in our ears, it was the person who invented the Bluetooth. He would watch Lieutenant Uhura with her piece in her ear, and he came up with the concept to make the actual Bluetooth. Captain Kirk's, they're communicators that would flip up. That's where we got the idea for the flip phone from. Video conferencing actually came from Star Trek. So this is showing how you can actually pull something down from the ethers and make it manifest right here. So much more in Star Trek has manifested in terms of actual technology here today. And so I know I got off track. If you hit me with the actual question, I'll get back on it, because I could ramble for hours about all the different aspects of Star Trek.
Nah, bro, you doing great. You doing great, man.
Yeah.
Like we can't, even when we get off, we on. You know what I'm saying? Like
Even we all feel, yeah.
you're you're foreshadowing my questions before I ask them.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like completely. The points that you're making about the captains, how we choose to lead ultimately. You can see Gene Roddenberry's mind. You know what I'm saying? You can see his mind, and you can see the minds of those that he chose to surround himself with. Because when we look at, you can tell so much from a birthday. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know, I don't know how many people, really think about that aspect, because, this is the future and this, that, and the third. But everything you just said about Captain Janeway makes so much sense to me, because that's what I was already thinking, because in my mind, she represents Sophia, right? Mm-hmm. Sophia, she was spurned for having Yaldabaoth. She was spurned for having a child, the one who wasn't supposed to exist. And I think that's reflected in her behavior and in her lack of a relationship. She was very close with her number one. I forget his name. The guy he has the eye.
Chakotay.
Yes, right. They were very close. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could tell they were best friends. You know what I'm saying? But like, and there was like this maybe something else there, but as long as they had that, they were cool. You know what I'm saying? Now, what's interesting is if we fast forward a little bit, let's walk across. Um, James T. Kirk was born in 2233,
Mm-hmm.
right? So he's a one life path, right? So that's rigid. You know what I'm saying? That's aggressive. That's boldness. Some people might say it's an asshole. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Um, when we look at Picard, he was a 3. So was Catherine Janeway. She was born May 20th, 2336. Right? She had to have that heart of play, even though the overarching narrative was so severe and so serious, about actually getting these people home.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't care so much about herself. She wasn't necessarily going back to anything. She was having more fun, actually having this adventure. But when you look at Benjamin Sisko, again, you have this one because you have this need to lead. We see this because he goes from being a commander to an actual captain.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stress that enough, especially for fans of Star Trek. Like there was, that's actually how I learned about the importance of it. Because I remember being a child having a time of my life watching this show with my mother, and then there was a show called Entertainment Tonight.
I remember that.
Um, Entertainment Tonight had a show about Trekkies protesting because there was no ship, and Captain Benjamin Sisko was not a captain; he was a commander.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what the fuck are they talking about? It's like this nigga runs a whole like it's. I can look back at that anger now, and it hits me like if black people, because there's this narrative of doing what we've already done over again. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so hard to go forward into the unknown as opposed to looking back and trying. Oh, we was Kimming and we was this and we did that already.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like I can look at DS9 being ran by Benjamin Sisko almost like we took over the world again. Okay, well now what?
Mm-hmm.
It don't mean nothing because we got to go somewhere else. That's why the wormhole is here. You see what I'm saying? So I'm gonna jump ahead again because I think they recognized the same issue that you did, and I think they tried to correct it. Because when we look at Star Trek Discovery, you have a black female captain, right? And her name is Michael.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
straight up.
I know you know a little bit about Michael. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. You know what I'm saying? Because her birthday, interestingly enough, is 2226. For anybody not doing the math, that's another 3 life paths. And not only do we get to see the original doing her thing, but we get to see her do it while she's in love.
Yeah.
With her partner across the. I can't stress that shit enough. But I'm gonna shut up, man. I'm gonna rant on that.
Now, I mean, I'm glad you brought up Discovery. That was something that Discovery. They tried something different with that series. They tried to have the feel of the episodic, where you had these different adventures, but they tried to do it season by season. So they tried to, like how like you go back to Captain Kirk's Star Trek, every episode was encapsulated problem, reaction, solution, each one. So they tried to take that into a seasonal approach, where each season was a problem, reaction, solution. And so when Discovery started, there was big problems, right? Big problems. People didn't like the Klingons. It was Michelle Yeoh was the original captain. Was it Michelle Yeoh? Yeah. So as it progressed and it settled down into one narrative, that was the first thing I caught, that she was the only one that was paired in real time with the masculine and feminine. Because if you go back to the rest, it was all, even now, right now, Strange New Worlds is going down. And we see that these captains are always perceived as neglecting family and love for career, right? So you figure you can say to yourself that there is some aspect that says, you know, if you have a chance to be God or be human, what you gonna choose? Because when you're out there in outer space, you're God. You're the final decision. You know, if you don't report back to Starfleet Command, whatever you say goes, right? And so they have a oh, peace. There go Visa. Hey, Visa. So there's an aspect of where they tend to show that all of these male and the singular female as having their head in the clouds, where they neglect their families. That's what made Cisco so big, because he actually mourned the loss of his wife and he held on closely to his son. And then, like you said, after DS9, we went to the Voyager series, and Janeway was holding on to what she thought she had at home, but eventually she realized he had moved on, and so she was alone. So here it comes with Michael Burnham. I'm gonna be honest, numerology, I'm not big on the numbers as you are, right? So for me, I always look at overarching themes, and I just truly enjoyed the fact that we had a pairing of the masculine and feminine. And even though they had to present some kind of conflict where they did fall out, she had to be honest enough with herself to realize that they needed each other, that she still, even though she had a problem with how he approached whatever, she needed that balance. And so again, there were problems with how that series ended. The same way, like you said, when DS9 began, there was problem with how it ended, because people felt like it wrapped up funny. You know, it didn't tie up all the loose ends like they would have hoped. But however, what I did like is it showed in the end that she was perfectly balanced with her mate. They were still together. They had a son who was pursuing his path. So yeah. But okay, yeah. And I got something else. Hit me back again, and then I wanted to bring something else up if you wanted to stay on that topic.
Bro, listen, I ain't never gonna cut your wisdom. You go right ahead, because where I'm going after this is going. We gonna hit a Stargate somewhere. So by all means, go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to say this. So if you're familiar with Deep Space Nine, Captain Cisco went back to 2024. I want to say September 10th or 14th. He went back in time to basically a month from now, right? And so what I find kind of prophetic is that in that episode, mind you, Deep Space Nine came out in the mid 90s, I want to say. No, late 90s, mid to late 90s. And Deep Space Nine came out, like late 90s. And so to find out that they kind of perfectly captured 2024 in a lot of ways, they showed that the gap between the haves and the have-nots had increased. Homelessness had gotten out of control and things like that. And so I'm always amazed at the foretellings that we find in Star Trek, not just in terms of technology, you know. And so to me, I get a personal little kick out of it, you know, whatever. And then I bring it up because when Cisco went back in time, he had to impersonate this historical figure who happened to be Gabriel Bale, you know. And so Michael Bale, Gabriel Bale, but we know that Gabriel is that archangel, that Gabriel is the angel that blows the trumpet. And a lot of people think Gabriel's trumpet is a sounding for war, but Gabriel's trumpet is actually a sound for replenishment and reincarnation. Several authors refer to Gabriel's horn as the fecundating horn. It's a horn of fertility. You know, Gabriel is placed at the moon, so the moon is the yoni. It's an aspect of incarnation. But that's all I wanted to speak on before we got too deep. But go ahead, we can jump. We can hit whatever warp conduits we want to tap into.
You just said a whole word with that. You know what I'm saying? I gotta say special shout out to Justin Thomas, aka Tefero Wazar, author of the Fable Avenue saga, the first book being The Ghost of Gabriel's Horn. If you do not have that book, you need that book in your life. Shout out Justin Thomas, man. Um, so again, you moonwalkers right to where I was going already, right? Um, there's something in your book that hit me hard when I actually saw it in print because I've never actually seen it in print before. I've heard it sporadically across different, well, at this point, maybe a couple series, but one primarily. And it sounds familiar. Um, the Ferengi rules of acquisition,
Uh-huh.
right? Um, Man, it's cold. There's a lot of I want to say icy wisdom. It's almost like Gnosticism, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, and it's got a big Saturn overtone, and it reminds me of those Revelation 2:9 people. You know what I'm saying? Those who say that they are these people, but they are not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, man, it's when you juxtapose that next to their idea about prophecy and prophets, it's extremely telling. Can you go into that a little bit for those who may not know? Because I know the Ferengi, Quark. I forget the young nephew who was the friend of
Jake. Nah.
Jake. Nah, right. Um, there was a lot of wisdom in their joking, and
Yeah.
their jokes were obtuse. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But for those who caught it, can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah. See, now that also is in the book. So what you have to understand is that uh first I'll say this. Gene Roddenberry had the overall concept. He had his hands involved, but he had writers, and these writers tap in and they just pull this information down. So yeah, Gene Roddenberry had to green light it, but this information, this is all channeled information. It's getting pulled down, and so the Ferengi were introduced. They had a problem with the Ferengi when they were first introduced. They were supposed to be this unpredictable, dangerous ally, but they always came off as comical. And so the harder that Picard struggled with the Ferengi, the weaker it made Picard look. So they actually said, scrap the Ferengi, pull them out of there, because they weren't using them right. They were like these little, they were portraying them as like little nickel slick oil salesmen. Like back in the 1800s, the people who would say they had an elixir that is, give me $2. This elixir cures coughs, colds, headaches, toothaches, removes your gallbladder. They were trying too hard to portray them as these greedy. Again, I felt like they was meant to portray the greed of the Jewish machine, not the spiritual Jewish that most of us think of in terms of consciousness, but that greedy, money grubbing. That's what they were meant to evoke images of. But it only came off as comical. It wasn't until Deep Space Nine that we actually began to take them seriously, because they were shown as more than just a one-sided character. Now, the beauty of it is, once they got to diving into the Ferengi mythos, we find out that, wait a second, their leader's called the Grand what? The Grand Nagus. For me, that was telling. That said it all right there. Nagus is a Negus. That's the king. That's the grand ruler. But we take that back to the African continent. His staff was clearly had the gold head on top of it. It was meant to embody and signify ancient wealth. So for me, I can remember watching that DS9, and I thought like Mansa Musa. I thought, that's to me, like I said, those were the images that evoked to me. Whereas originally they were meant to be these little greedy Jewish people that could, more comical. But now we got to see that there was actually a method to their madness. And when I got onto the idea of prophets as in the spiritual aspect, and profits in terms of the monetary, was when we got to this series, because DS9 constantly the Bajorans and Cisco spoke about profits from the wormhole aliens, the wormhole entities, and this religious aspect, and that was always juxtaposed with the Ferengi and their eternal pursuit of profits. And so, actually, that led me down, and this was years ago, led me down an entire little rabbit hole where I would actually, and sometimes I'd be kind of embarrassed to say it. I actually used to meditate on different Star Trek aspects, and I saw a whole thing play out for myself just in terms of the connection between profit and profits. And that's when I realized that the Ferengi actually, they weren't seen as comical. It was the same. It was the same feeling that people had towards like Mansa Musa, that they were hoarders of wealth, that they just had all this money and they were just in pursuit of more. And so I appreciate the fact that they introduced this concept that they call it the great material continuum, and it's seen as a river flowing with opportunity. And so in one of the episodes, Nog explains it to Chief O'Brien, that everybody's swimming down this great continuum, and if you ride the currents right, you won't wash up on the shore of destitution. You just hit that sweet spot and you enjoy a very comfortable life. And so the idea, I think that was masterful, that they juxtaposed the concept of profits in terms of monetary and profits in terms of deities and religious aspects. Because one thing you find out is that Quark in particular was critical to Deep Space Nine. Matter of fact, one of the first things that Cisco did once he was given command of that space station, he went and blackmailed Quark and told him he couldn't leave. That's how critical profits and profits are. You know what I'm saying? The two go hand in hand. And so Quark was seen as, if you think about it, he survived several different regimes. He was there with the Cardassians, sold them food and alcohol, and sold the Bajorans medical supplies on the down low. He was there with Starfleet, did his thing, and even when the Dominion came through and they took over, he managed to survive all of that. And so that shows the importance of both profits and profits, that adaptability, the ability to ride that great material continuum and not land up on the shores of destitution. But I just think that actually there's a whole arc in that's been yet to be explored, and it's something that I would love to put down either in a movie or a fictional book, just to show the evolution of the Ferengi, because the Ferengi, they're deeply spiritual. So you can imagine if Ferengis actually took their pursuit of profits to actually a more spiritual path, shoot, they would turn into the futuristic Jehovah's Witnesses. That's how I kind of look at it myself. But yeah, it's just, to me, that series, I go to it a lot because they managed to tie up a lot of loose ends in this series and help to explain the past and pave the way for the future. We actually find out in the Deep Space Nine series why the Klingons went from having no ridges to having ridges. We find out what was going on with the tribbles and little things like that. So yeah, I just think that all in all, the clearly the Ferengi are melanated. Clearly, like I said, to have a Grand Nagus, and we know that Nagus comes from Negus. Negus implies a ruler from Ethiopia. The parallels are there, and so for us to get this term, to get this designation brought to us for the Grand Nagus, while Benjamin Sisko, a black man, is made commander of the space station. None of it happens by happenstance. And when you spoke on earlier about the pushback with Avery Brooks being made the commander, and then not only is he not a captain, but he's black, all of these things come and happen when they're supposed to. All of them.
Oh yeah, most definitely, most definitely. it is so grand a picture, a painting to actually see in hindsight. Um, at the time, my mind was, I don't know, maybe it was better because it perceived certain things, from that youthful perspective without necessarily knowing the deeper meaning. But you need the perspective and experience of both to really understand, in my opinion. Um, there's a connection with the next generation and Deep Space Nine.
Mhm.
You actually touched on briefly what you just said. What's his name? Miles?
Miles O'Brien. Yep.
Miles O'Brien. He was also on the next generation.
Hmm.
He came to the station with his wife. I think they had a daughter, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, and later, you also got Lieutenant Commander Worf, right?
Hmm.
Um, and there was this narrative, with between he and Jadzia Captain Cisco. There's a very obvious connection between the Klingons and Norse mythology,
Very
um,
close. Yep.
especially when you look at Sto-vo-kor and Valhalla. Even how the Valkyries would come, be summoned to spirit the dead away to
Hmm.
Valhalla. Um, in in terms of the Klingons being one of the first species that we saw go from being enemy to working with Starfleet. Essentially, we could say being assimilated. We can say uh, getting a seat at the table. However you choose to see it. Um, but I think that's obvious for a certain reason for those who choose to see it, because for those who are familiar with mythology, you can't help but draw the comparisons. But there's some stark, I mean, it doesn't change much aside from the name.
Hmm.
I don't really have a question. I just I
Oh
just
no.
I just wanted to know your thoughts on it.
I just want to. Yeah, I do. I want to share. If you look at it, first, the aspect, like you said, they were like one of the first. Actually, the Klingons weren't the first to be assimilated, more or less. Actually, it was the Andorians, right? You get that piece from Star Trek Enterprise with Scott Bakula as Captain Jonathan Archer. His name says a lot too, Jonathan Archer. So the thing about Star Trek, the overarching theme is that all they need is time and opportunity, and they're gonna wear you down. You know, the to say that they assimilate, actually, that's brought up in several different of the series. They say that actually, if you think about it, in DS9, Quark was talking to Garrick, the Romulan, not the Romulan, the Cardassian spy, and he was saying how Starfleet is actually very insidious. They actually wear you down and win you over. So uh, with the Klingons, they viewed the Klingons as their ultimate rivals. That was that aggressive part that had to be brought into check. And a lot of people look at the Klingons, like you said, the connection to Norse mythology is there for all to see. But if you think about it, if you go back to Captain Kirk's Star Trek, they were more Mongolian. They looked like Mongols, right? Now, even though now it's been fully realized that you can make all the connections to Norse mythology. Actually, the term that they use, the Klingons say, "Today is a good day to die," that's actually Native American. That stems from Native Americans, from the Indians, right? And so a lot of times we tend to look at the different mythologies and while on the surface it has a very Nordic uh, connection. But again, if you think about it, originally they were conceptualized as Mongols, as East Asian, and but the terminology they used, their warrior aspect actually was taken from Native Americans, and that was from the time period when the that westward expansion, because Gene Roddenberry was into westerns. So even though he gave them the appearance of like Mongolians, they were actually depicting the Native Americans as Europeans moved westward and encroached on their territory. That's why the Klingons are portrayed as being xenophobic. We don't like outsiders, because that was actually how Native Americans felt. When the Europeans started to move westward, they encroached on their territory. But I just think that the most beautiful aspect of Klingon mythology is the fact that they killed their gods. And I say that's beautiful, not because, for any kind of sacrilegious reasons or whatever, but I think it's beautiful and very telling in that they chose to invoke their deities, to become living aspects of their deities, as opposed to worshiping and looking up to them. And so for me, that was that was just that was just awesome to me, just to show that aspect. And then, like you said, we see that they actually have a barge of the dead. Now, that barge, that goes back to like Greek and Roman mythology, you would think, but even that goes back further to Kemetic mythology. So I find that if you follow the correspondences from what you know, and then look backwards, you always see a more ancient connection.
Always, always. Um, you see that brilliantly, I think, in the Bajorans.
Mm-hmm.
The Bajorans, um, they always stood out because they have this. Um, I remember it briefly. Reading your book has been a time travel device in more ways than one. Um, the nine orbs.
Yeah.
Um, there's an obvious um, correlation to the planets. There's an obvious correlation to Kabbalah. Can you walk us through that for those who may not be as familiar with that idea, that narrative?
Just in terms of Kabbalah and Star Trek, or just the orbs in Kabbalah?
Yes, all of the above.
All of the above. Okay. No.
Have at it.
Okay. So what you find that the Kabbalistic connection, what you find is that oh wow, 1 second. My daughter's in there debating lively. Um Trying to think where to begin. The the Kabbalistic connection, well, for me, what I find is that you'll find that Starfleet, or rather not Starfleet, the Federation represents Malkuth, everything physical. This is the jumping off point, and this is working up the tree. And so working up the tree, if Starfleet, if the Federation represents Malkuth, where everything physical comes together and coalesces, as you begin to go up that tree, and then you reach Yasar, which is the moon. Actually, if you're familiar with Star Trek, you know that not so much at the moon, but just above Earth in orbit, they begin to that's where they begin to build their ships. This is where they had their first shipyards. Eventually, the shipyards moved to, I want to say, Jupiter or Saturn. But just Kabbalistically, so from the moon, that became the jumping off point, which is Yesod in Kabbalah, to actually begin to access the different aspects of the tree, which, you have the pillar of severity, which is representative of the feminine aspect, and you have the pillar of justice, which is representative of the masculine. So what I find is that, kabbalistically speaking, as they begin to work up, we explored that hermetic aspect of the tree, which is the through learning, Spock, study, practice, the mystical aspect, because Vulcans actually were the ones that introduced spirituality, meditations. It was before all these other races. It was the Vulcans that introduced us to these concepts. They were very, well, we thought them to be rigid, but they were very disciplined. And so they found ways to control their urges and desires and to operate that way. That's all hermetic. So that's, to me, that was the first dynamic that you find in opposition to each other between Kirk and Spock, because Spock was more hermetic, whereas Kirk was more like a Wiccan. He was more natural, whereas Spock was more hermetic. He was through study and discipline and practice. That's how he got what he was, and that's the two opposite uh, poles on the tree of life. So one would be Netsack, which is Venus, and then Hard, which is Mercury. Mercury is the path of the magician, of the studier, of the learner, whereas Netsack, that path of passion and that Kirk-like idea was would be Netsack or Venus. And so for me, that was the polarity that every Star Trek iteration took, whether you find yourself on the hermetic path, or if you find yourself on that Venusian or that Wiccan path of emotion and feeling. For the most part, most captains found themselves on that hermetic side. Very few were Captain Kirk. Even Janeway was more of following that hermetic path. First of all, as being an example of the divine feminine, because on that hermetic side, you get hold and hold. Oh wow, hold, Bina, and Gebera on that pillar. You get those three emanations. So it's Bina, Gebera, and then Hod. So that's actually the feminine side of the pillar. And so that would be the aspect that even Janeway represented. Majority of captains found themselves on that side, having to be more of the severity aspect. So on the other side, really it's just Kirk. But as you work yourself up way up the tree, you find that Starfleet Command is actually placed in the center at Tiferet, because it has access to all these different roles. And what I don't know if I dropped this in my book or not, but kabbalistically speaking, the 32 paths that you see, if you ever see the Tree of Life and the 32 paths, those paths actually represent the warp conduits, the warp corridors, I mean. So when they access these different corridors and they say, warp factor 9, take us to wherever, they're actually accessing those 32 paths, and so kabbalistically, you can look at the different paths that they take, those same 32 paths with the 22, including the 10 Sephiroth, they directly apply to the major arcana. So the only thing that I really strove to do was to show the correspondence and connection, so that you can, whether your discipline lies in Tarot, whether your discipline lies in Kabbalah, or if your discipline lies in the chakra system, because all of those they line up perfectly and allow you to find yourself in a way to apply it in your life. So, like, as you work your way up the tree, you have that space where Da'ath is at, right? So, I went from Netzach, Hole, Tiferet. You have Gebera, which is Saturn, and that's where we get the severity aspect from. But really, Saturn's severity really is only in relation to time. If you really get down to the basis of it, it's really just the severity of time, the limitation and constrictions and disciplinary aspects of time. On the opposite side, you have Jupiter, which is the king of plenty. I forget the exact term escaping me now, but that's the planet of Jupiter as largesse. It's expansive. I had dropped that. See, Freeman L represents the planet Jupiter. That's expansive. It's prosperity. It's the peaceful king, right? As opposed to the warrior aspect of Saturn. Now, above that is Da'at. Now, if you remember, I don't know if you were big on Star Trek Enterprise. Da'at is represented there by the Necrid Expanse. You remember that space, that Necrid Expanse in Star Trek, where Jonathan Archer had to go through this unknown region that was full of all these anomalies. And if you remember, it used to warp the hole, and it affected their skin and their bodies. Well, that's Da'at, because a lot of people look at Da'at and they immediately interpret the aspect of knowledge, right, or a doorway. But the best way to think of Da'at, and I got this from the book by Gareth Knight, I believe, Kabbalistic Symbolism. Da'at is like a tightrope, but that tightrope is not a rope; it's actually like a blade. And so, if you fall off either side of that blade, you find yourself in this Necrid expanse, so to speak. And what he refers it to is, he says, is actually the toilet bowl of the universe. Because Da'at is where basically all bad ideas, even though Da'at is knowledge, and it's sitting in the center of that space between the upper three triad and the rest of the tree. Da'at is just an island. Surrounding that island is like a cesspool. These are where all bad ideas go. I mean, nothing is thrown away; it's recycled. But he referred to it as the cesspool of the universe, right? So Da'at is and that's telling him that knowledge is actually a tightrope, and it's actually a dangerous one at that, because the only difference between insanity and genius is that thin line you walk, And so once you pass that, that's where the wormhole from Deep Space Nine, all of the time travel, all of that exists above Da'at and that upper triad, which comprises of Kether, Hokmah, and Binah. And this is where you actually get back to the source. This is where the Q exists. This is where Wesley Crusher became the traveler, and he went. This is where the metahumans and deities eventually ascend to in the Star Trek universe. And so I know that was a quick run through, but that's about the fastest breakdown I can give of Star Trek and Kabbalah.
Bro, that was absolutely magnificent. You know what I'm saying? Thank you for that. I know you got to go. I wanna leave the people with a quote from your book. It's my favorite jewel. It's the one thing that has stuck with me the most, because I see so many different correlations. I read this, and all I can tell people is if you haven't gotten this book yet, you really need to get it. Ferengi Afterlife and the Divine Treasury. The Divine Treasury is the Ferengi Afterlife, where the souls of the deceased prophet, envisioned as a vast, opulent place filled with wealth upon death. A Ferengi is required to present a bribe, the entrance fee, to the celestial auctioneers to gain entry into the divine treasury. This reflects their belief that even in the afterlife, commerce and transactions are paramount. If a Ferengi cannot pay the entrance fee, they are sent to the vault of eternal destitution, a place of eternal poverty and deprivation, which is the ultimate punishment for a Ferengi. You can't have an understanding of that. You can't read that. You can't witness that within this series and not draw an immediate correlation to the plight of supposed Black people, melanated, indigenous, Moorish, whatever term you want to use, whatever hat, they're all ours, right? Can you leave us with your thought on that? I don't want to hold you too long. You got to go, bro.
Yeah, I just think that in the end, it will come down to the same thing in the Kemetic tale, the scale, where you weigh your heart versus a feather. You know, the destitution and the profits and the things like that, they're not weighed on a scale in terms of physical matters, in terms of what matters to you. So we just have to make sure that, like those Ferengi, you stay true to your principles, right? And when it's all over, you will know in your heart that you did your job, and you don't have to worry about that spiritual destitution, you know, of finding yourself having to come back and repeat the same lessons over and over. And I think that's definitely what I take from it. That's definitely what I take from it.
Well, I greatly appreciate you for another wonderful bill, bro. We're gonna have to do this again. As you know, there's entirely too much meat here. I know. I have an inkling. I have an inkling in the mind of my brother here. So I know how much more you actually have. I would imagine you know. I might be able to guess what one of them books you're working on might be about. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna see. I can't wait. I'm hopeful. You create that movie in that series. You know what I'm
Oh
saying?
man, it's going down.
I am here for it, and whatever capacity I can be. I want to thank you again for joining us, bro. Tell us where we can find your material. You know, you can find all of Michael Bell, the professor's links on my link tree. But please, sir, give out your information one time, and we'll let you slide on.
Absolutely. You can, if you want to purchase any of my books, you can go to www.pillarbookpublishing.com. Facebook is Michael Bell. I always make sure that my profile pic has my face, so you'll know it's me. Instagram, it is I am who I think I am. Same thing. It'll always be my face up there. I also have another Instagram page, which is just for books, which is Pillar Publishing LLC. That's on Instagram. On TikTok, you can find me as the Professor 781. So accessible like we all are. The one thing is, I'm always down to build. So if you do come across any platform, tap in, and I'm always down to build.
Greatly appreciate you, big bro. Thank you again for joining me today. You know, I'm diving into more Star Trek. You know what I'm saying? I'm neglecting newer things because I'm diving back. But you can always go forward faster the further we look back. So
Yeah.
I greatly appreciate you. I thank you for that, bro. We're gonna do this again very soon. Love, peace, and power to everybody on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you, Moonfeather and Ruel Black and
Thank you.
Magic LaCroix. Everybody who checked in, greatly appreciate y'all, and we will be doing this again soon. Love, peace, and power.
All right. Peace. Thank you, brother.